Россия не заинтересована в дезинтеграции Афганистана. Если это произойдет, вот тогда не с кем будет разговаривать. А если это так, то нужно подумать о том, что чем быстрее Талибан войдет в, так скажем, семью цивилизованных народов, тем легче будет контактировать и общаться, и как-то влиять, и задавать какие-то вопросы.
It's been about 5 months the Taliban have been ruling Afghanistan. The previous authorities fled the country following the withdrawal of US troops, leaving the Taliban a war-ravaged country with frozen assets.
The asset is for the property of the people of Afghanistan. When the chapter of occupation is closed and another phase of independence, freedom, and reconstruction and rehabilitation of Afghanistan is beginning. So there is of course need for budget in order to carry out these projects.
The Taliban can't access the assets of Afghanistan. The US has blocked the Taliban from accessing Afghan central bank assets because the Taliban isn't recognized by the world as a legitimate Afghan government. And exactly for this reason, the Taliban can't attract significant amount of foreign investments to restore the national economy. Meanwhile, the country really needs the money. Famine and a serious humanitarian crisis are expected in Afghanistan in the spring. And according to some reports, since August last year, due to the departure of American and foreign companies, as well as the fall of the economy, about 500,000 Afghans have lost their jobs. And some reports are even saying by the middle of this year, their number will rise to over 900,000. The United Nations apparently is trying to provide some sort of humanitarian assistance, but it's clearly not enough. And that's why the Taliban leadership is asking foreign states to expedite diplomatic procedures. The Taliban movement's acting Prime Minister Mullah Mohammed Hassan Akhund said he calls on all countries, especially the Islamic ones, to begin the process of recognition. The Taliban Foreign Ministry also assured that it fulfilled all the basic preconditions necessary for recognition. That is, they've taken control of the country's borders and ensured law and order on its territory. At present, according to the Taliban, they feel they've done everything that is required for international recognition. They've even promised that the territory of Afghanistan will never again be used by one country against another. However, the situation isn't that simple because different countries have different demands on Afghanistan and some of them seem impossible to be met.
For us, it's like saying yes to Taliban. That Norway want to say yes to Taliban.
The Taliban is actively conducting dialogue on recognition with countries of the West, and the West demands not only security but also a bunch of other things. The US and the European Union want the Taliban to ensure in Afghanistan respect for human rights and especially women, freedom of speech, the introduction of normal female education, clearly defined minority rights and obligations of the state to protect them, as well as an inclusive government, which will include opponents of the Taliban, which all sounds perfectly reasonable. However, the West wants to see a liberal model of governance in Afghanistan, and that's not going to work. The Taliban movement doesn't refuse to communicate with the Americans and the Europeans on these topics. To give you an example, last month between the 23rd and the 25th of January, inter-Afghan talks were held in Oslo, which were attended by representatives of the Taliban. At the same time, the Norwegian authorities separately discussed that the invitation of representatives of the Taliban does not at all mean their recognition. And the Taliban can't introduce Western liberal orders in Afghanistan. The very ideology of the movement contradicts them, not to mention the Afghan tradition, which even the Americans and the former Afghan authorities appointed by the US couldn't overcome. On the other hand, the West can't refuse the liberal order. It's quite clear that the United States will certainly hesitate to recognize the Taliban, and it may never will, because if Biden recognizes the Taliban government and works with it, and journalists start transmitting footage from Kabul with stoning of women, then the American government will be under tremendous pressure, which will be uncomfortable for Biden, especially before the US midterm elections happening in November this year. The Republicans already denounced Biden for what they call a shameful withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, and if he recognizes the Taliban, they will only add to these accusations also the loss of so-called moral leadership in the defense of human rights. There's a country that is an ally of the United States and at the same time preserves its version of the Sharia order in its country. That's Saudi Arabia. But the Taliban simply don't have such a volume of money that the Saudis spend on investing in American media and research centers to maintain a positive image. Money can make the Americans forget about the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi and the humanitarian crisis in Syria and Yemen. So to get any recognition, the Taliban have more of a chance to become recognized by Eastern powers. Taliban knows this for a fact and is already negotiating with Iran, China and Russia. There are three main requirements for this trio. First, the Taliban must drive terrorist organizations out of Afghanistan, those who use the territory of the country for operations against Iran, the countries of Central Asia as well as China. And we're not just talking about Daesh Khorasan group, but also Al-Qaeda, the Eastern Turkestan Islamic movement, the Pakistani Taliban also known as the TTP, anti-Iranian and anti-Indian groups and Central Asian militant movements, including the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. The demands are quite feasible because most of these organizations are enemies of the Taliban. The second requirement is the cessation or at least the minimization of drug trafficking. This is a huge problem for Russia and Iran and is also solvable. Right now, drug trafficking is the backbone of Afghanistan's economy. However, with the help of investments and other programs, the Afghan authorities can achieve a sharp reduction in opium poppy crops. Finally, the third requirement would be the respect for the rights of religious and ethnic minorities, which is expressed through the standard requirement of inclusiveness of power. The trio would like to see a fair representation of everyone in the Afghan government and not just Pashtun men. This requirement seems perfectly legitimate and reasonable. If the Taliban meets the Russian, Chinese, Iranian demands, they will get much more than from the West. Not just money from frozen accounts, but real Chinese investments, Russian political guarantees, and Iranian infrastructure. Iran already supplies electricity to Afghanistan. In addition, the Iranian port of Chabahar can play a big role in the restoration of the Afghan economy. Indian-Afghan trade can be carried out through the Iranian territory. It's difficult to work with Pakistan at present, given the tensions between India and Pakistan. I have a very good feeling that this year we will see the recognition of the Taliban as a legitimate government in Afghanistan. However, it will certainly be the countries of the East facilitating and working with it rather than the United States and its allies.